Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So it's been a while since I've talked about the Idaho 4 case, so I figured I'd do a little kind of compilation of just some news clips, some information that's been going on in the last week in the case. I mean, not anything too big because we're gonna have to wait for the trial really, because there's a gag order and stuff, but there's been some things popping up here and there. News Nation's had some things, different news sources has just had some, random things, so I'm gonna talk about them. So the first thing we are going to talk about is under a new bill introduced in the Idaho legislature, Bryan Kohberger could face a firing squad upon conviction if the prosecution seeks the death penalty. So depending on if they're going to seek the death penalty, he could possibly die by a firing squad. So I guess a bill introduced by Republican State Rep Bruce Skog would reinstate execution by firing squad in the state, a method that was legal from 1982 to 2009. Prosecutors have not yet shared if they will intend to seek the death penalty, which would be by lethal injection under current Idaho law. But under Skog's bill, I hope I'm saying that right. Skag? I don't know. I'll just call him Skog. Okay, so under Skog's bill, the Idaho Department of Correction would have to determine whether lethal injection is available no later than 5 days after a death warrant is issued. If lethal injection is not possible, a firing squad would be used in its place, per the bill. Lethal injection is the maximum penalty used in cases which the suspect pleads guilty or is found guilty of first-degree murder. Kohberger is facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The death penalty is legal in 27 states throughout the U.S. In just 4 states, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Utah, and South Carolina, allow firing squads. However, the law in South Carolina is currently on hold after it was challenged. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, all states and federal government use lethal injection as their primary method of execution where it is legal. Lethal injection also has the highest rate of botched executions, according to experts. Lethal injections are a controversial topic, as advocates against the death penalty point to the number of executions botched year after year as a reason to abolish the practice. So in 2022, dubbed the Year of the Botched Execution by the Death Penalty Information Center, 7 of 20 execution attempts were visibly problematic due to either executioner incompetence or protocol failures. As Skog advocated to bring back firing squads in Idaho, he said that he believed it to be a more humane execution method. There can be about 10 seconds of extreme pain before death at times, but I find it to be, in my personal view, more humane than lethal injection, Skog said. Utah brought back a firing squad in recent years due to the inability to get the materials necessary to have lethal injections. Last year, state officials in Idaho were forced to cancel the scheduled execution of convicted double murderer Gerald Pizzuto Jr., who is terminally ill, because they could not get the drugs needed for lethal injection. Pizzuto, 66, was served with a new death warrant last week, scheduling his execution for March 23rd, and the state is still working to obtain the lethal injection chemicals. The Idaho Department of Correction is not in possession of the chemicals necessary to carry out an execution by lethal injection. The department said in a February 24th press release explaining efforts to lawfully source chemicals are ongoing. The way it stands now, they may never get those materials for the lethal injections. The bill's sponsor, Republican Rep Bruce Skog, told the House Ways and Means Committee last week, in recent years, states across the U.S. have faced a shortage of drugs used in lethal injections, causing them to adopt new lethal injection methods or other alternative execution methods, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. Skog added, "This is a rule of law issue. Our criminal system should work and our penalty should be exacted." Last year, 2 Oklahoma death row inmates sought death by firing squad over lethal injection. Their attorney said at that time, while it may be gruesome to look at, we all agree it will be quicker. A public hearing for Skog's bill is set to be held in the Idaho House Judiciary, Rules, and Administration Committee, which Skog chairs. Gonzalez's family has publicly called for the death penalty in Kohberger's case. However, family attorney Shannon Gray said the decision would be made by all the families on whether or not the death penalty is pursued. Kohberger was arrested on December 30th after a months-long investigation. A hearing date is set for June 26, which will mark 7 months since the murders.
Accused killer Bryan Kohberger could potentially face an execution by firing squad. That's if he's convicted and if proposed legislation clears the Idaho state legislature. Idaho is one of several states that struggled to obtain the ingredients needed for lethal injections in recent years. Kohberger is charged with the murder of 4 University of Idaho students. He has not yet entered a plea.
So that's the first thing. So what do you guys think about that? So they're saying it might be even more humane to do it that way, considering all the botched executions in the past using the lethal injection. There's just been issues, or especially the electric chair. I know there's been complications with that too. But, some are arguing the firing squad would actually be a more humane method. Do you guys agree or disagree with that?
All I know is that the Idaho Department of Corrections has indicated that they have had issues getting these drugs available for an execution. And, the other thing about this whole issue is if Idaho does pass a law allowing for a firing squad execution, they are also going to have to go and build a $750,000 facility to facilitate those firing squad executions, which executions in the state of Idaho just don't take place that often.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds brutal, but I don't know. I mean, you're going to die either way, I guess. Some proponents of it would say. But the way I've understood with the firing squad is you've got a number of people with guns. Some have blanks, and then one person has the real bullet, and that way none of the people firing actually know, who's the one who actually had the kill shot. Is that the right understanding?
That's my understanding of how they have done it in the past. I think Utah was the last state to carry out a firing squad execution, and that's how they did it. Yeah, I mean, to say that it's more humane, I think probably begs the question of the definition of humane, really. I think, lethal injection just seems significantly more humane. I think the psychological buildup to a firing squad execution would be pretty devastating for a person to go through.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting, too, because we talk so much about the death penalty, especially in light of the Bryan Kohberger case that is now moving forward. But when you look back through the records, I mean, there's only been 3 people executed in Idaho since 1976. So the numbers are so minuscule. You mentioned the funding that would be needed to build that area for the firing squad. I don't think people realize just how little people are executed in the state.
Yeah, fortunately, we live in a state where, I think homicides in this state are broadly fall into 2 major categories. We've got drug cases where there's a shooting, between a couple of drug dealers, and then you have what I call crime of passion homicides. Those probably make up 99% of the homicides in this case. We've been very unfortunate over the last couple of years to have 2 really unusual homicides here in the state of Idaho, both the Kohberger case as well as the Velo Daybell murder, which is also set to come up for they're seeking the death penalty on that case also. So it is extremely rare. And I do think passing a law allowing the firing squad, to me, it's a bit of a stretch for how little we use it.
Now, we don't even know if they are going to pursue the death penalty or not. I guess, like I said, they're going to have to ask the families. Usually they go with what the families want. If it's able to be a death penalty case, they'll ask the families. And if that's what the families want, then that's what they'll do. But if that's not what the families want, then they won't. So I guess they'll see what everybody wants to do. Like you said, we know the Gonsalves want it because, we've even heard interviews where they said they definitely want the death penalty. But, they have to ask all the families. Okay, so that's that. And next I wanted to talk about, the Moscow, Idaho house where the 4 students were killed will be demolished, according to the university president. So President Green said in the statement that the University of Idaho accepted an offer from the owner of the off-campus home to give the property to the school following the killings. Demolition, Green said, removes efforts to further sensationalize the crime scene. So he says this is a healing step in the wake of a crime that shook our community, President Scott Green said in a letter to students and employees on Friday. We are evaluating options where students may be involved in the future development of the property. Green said a memorial, including a garden, will be designated on the university campus in honor of the slain students. The exact location hasn't been decided, Green said. The garden will also be a place of remembrance of other students we have lost and a place of healing for those left behind.
The house where 4 University of Idaho students were found murdered will be torn down. And the news coming more than 3 months after that crime rocked the small community of Moscow. Correspondent Nancy Liu joins us live. Nancy, the homeowner gave that property to the school.
That's right, Nicole. And in the wake of the quadruple murders, that 3-story house just off the Idaho campus is familiar to people all over the country. But soon that home will be demolished. The school telling News Nation it will happen before the end of this semester. The 6-bedroom rental on King Road is already boarded up and surrounded by a chain-link fence. Along with word that the owner has donated the structure to the University of Idaho, the school has announced plans to tear it down in the next few weeks. In a statement, the U of I president notes that this is a healing step and removes the physical structure where the crime that shook our community was committed. Demolition also removes efforts to further sensationalize the crime scene. We're evaluating options where students may be involved in the future development of the property.
Is this your car?
It's been nearly 2 months since the arrest of Bryan Kohberger, a graduate student at nearby Washington State who is now awaiting trial on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonsalves were found stabbed to death on November 13th. As the investigation took shape, the murder scene remained under guard for months. At one point, the tragic sight of police removing the personal items of the victims.
Can you tell us what you were looking for?
At others, News Nation on the scene exclusively as investigators worked the case. Also there later, as preparation for a remediation process was halted by a court to allow access by Kohberger's defense team. But now the home has been cleared, and indeed it has been an attraction among the curious. The U of I has also announced plans for 4 new scholarships, as well as a future healing garden and memorial to honor the 4 victims.
We will never forget Xana, Ethan, Madison, and Kaylee, and I will do everything in my power to protect their dignity and respect their memory, Green added. In addition to the memorial garden plans, the university said it's working out how to involve students on the future development of the property once the home is demolished. The university said it has also created a scholarship program in memory of Kernodle, Chapin, and Mogan, and intends to create another for the 4th victim, Gonsalves.
I do want to give you some of the reaction from the community, not only the neighbors who live nearby, but also students, who go there. What are their thoughts that this home will eventually be demolished? So I want to play some of that for you now. This is what they said when they were asked about the demolition.
I heard this morning that they're going to demolish the house. I think that it's a step in the right direction. We're going to get some closure on this. Every single time I drive by that, I think about it, I look at it. If it was gone and something else was there, that would be great.
As a student, having to move frequently around campus to be able to go to school, knowing that I lived in a place where people were so brutally murdered would not feel comfortable to me.
I think tearing down the house could be a good thing. And for a memorial, I think it'd be good to put it here on campus in one of the parks.
I don't think it needs to be torn down. However, if it is torn down, I believe the memorial should go in its place.
I don't think anyone would want to live in that house, but also out of respect to the people that were killed, I think it's a good action to take, just to take it down and maybe make it to some sort of memorial or some place where people can go and learn about what happened.
So there were a lot of people who wanted to say their piece, but not on camera. And let me give you some of that reporting as well. 3 of the neighbors who actually live right around the house said that they think it's just a horrible place. They don't want to look at that horrible place anymore, quote, that horrible place anymore. And so they support that the house is going to be torn down. And a couple of other neighbors, 2 men who actually share or adjacent in the backyard with the home. They didn't want to speak on camera, but they said that it's, quote, it's spooky looking at this house right now. They knew all of the kids who lived there. They had actually partied in the yard just, within the prior weeks to the murders. They said that they wanted their families to get justice. They were worried, though, that if the house were torn down early, possibly some technicality could prevent Bryan Kohberger from being appropriately punished. And this was a sentiment that our producer, our stringer, heard repeated often around town today. They were concerned. They wanted the house destroyed, but at the right time to make sure that all of the investigative work has been done, that there can be no, loophole if the house is gone, that could be a benefit to the defendant in this particular case. It's poignant. Also, the person who witnessed some of the TikTok dances said that they were shocked, quote, by how many people all day long were doing this. They couldn't believe how often that they had been doing the TikTok dances. You'll also be interested to hear that many of the neighbors who live around the house have signs up everywhere on their windows, doors saying, no comment, no media, go away. So we were very lucky to get this reaction today. I also want to play for you what some of the students said. And there you go. You can see some of the pictures. Reporters not welcome. We do not have a statement. Please respect our wishes. We have no statement. Please leave us alone. And then I wanted to give you a couple of the comments of what some of the students we talked to today felt about a memorial on campus or elsewhere. And here's what they said.
Maybe a good spot for a memorial would be somewhere around that area. I think maybe if we wanted to remember it more specifically, maybe over by the library or something to that effect would be good spots for that.
I feel like having the memorial on campus would definitely be a lot better than off campus.
As far as building a memorial on campus, I think that definitely needs to happen. It's a beautiful campus, so I think anywhere they decide will be great.
I am not exactly sure where their memorial should be, but I don't think it should be at the place of their murder, because to be tied to just their deaths is not something I would wish upon anyone, and I would rather celebrate who they were in life than mourn them for who they were that night.
The community of Moscow and this home on King Road are forever tied to the murders that took place inside. And that's why, as the community focuses on healing, the university has decided to demolish it.
Both the owner and the university agreed, and then consulted, of course, with the families and agreed that demolition of the house would indeed happen, and happen as quickly as possible.
This home that's now been seen by people across the country will soon be gone.
For myriad reasons that all move toward moving the university forward, moving our community forward, and most importantly, remembering and honoring the 4 students that died.
Which has been hard to do with people constantly taking photos and videos.
There have been a lot of Instagrammers and other social media people hanging around the scene, and that's really not helpful for us to be able to move forward.
We spoke with one student that lives next door to the home on King Road. He says he doesn't want us to use his full name, but he told us he believes demolishing the home is the right decision.
I think that it's important that the university does things like that for this town and this campus, because people definitely need to heal from it.
He says the murders that happened right next door changed how he views his town's safety.
Before it happened, I kind of threw caution in the wind all the time. We left our doors unlocked. Just never really felt like I had to watch my back in Moscow, Idaho. We installed a new security system, and I'm taking care of that every day.
The university will also be installing a healing garden and memorial for Ethan, Xana, Kaylee, and Maddie, and other vandals whose lives were cut short.
We hope that this place would be that place where students feel comfortable sitting or standing, reflecting, thinking about maybe someone that they've lost, to have that place where they can go and feel that the Vandal spirit and the Vandal family love.
And this is all still in the early stages, but once it's complete, students will have a space on campus to heal and move forward from this tragedy.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the discovery that Bryan supposedly, I guess, had photos of one of the victims. Now, they're not saying which victim, of course, because the whole gag order. So I'm not sure if this is legit. I mean, where did this come from? Most of the news sources are reporting on it. So I'm sure that their sources are probably credible, right? Whoever they got this information. But yeah, allegedly, Bryan had multiple photos of one of the female victims on his phone, suggesting that he had been specifically paying attention to her. A source connected to the case said this week. The images were found on Kohberger's phone when it was seized by investigators after he was arrested in late December for the November 13th stabbing deaths of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. Though the source did not identify which of the female victims was in the pictures, they confirmed that Kohberger had more than one photo of her. It was clear that he was paying attention to her, they said. Though investigators are tight-lipped on the Pennsylvania native's possible ties to the victims, cell phone data included in a probable cause affidavit revealed that he may have stalked the neighborhood multiple times in the months before the murders. The affidavit also included touch DNA evidence linking Kohberger to a knife sheath at the scene, as well as reports from surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, who came face to face with the alleged killer as he left the property. According to 2 anonymous sources, Kohberger followed at least one student to her car. In nearly 2 months since he was arrested at his parents' home, past classmates and acquaintances have recalled Kohberger as a creepy loner who morphed from a bullied teen into an aggressive adult. Jordan Sorolnik, the owner of Seven Sirens Brewing Company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, said last month that Kohberger had a history of harassing women at his bar. He'll have 2 or 3 beers, then just get a little too comfortable, he recalled, noting that Kohberger got upset when the women rebuffed his advances. News of Kohberger's alleged camera roll evidence comes shortly after it was reported that Bryan was fired from his teaching assistant position, amid allegations that he behaved inappropriately with female students.
Allegations accused murderer Bryan Kohberger had photos of one of the victims. They were allegedly on his phone when he was arrested. Kohberger is accused of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students last November. He was arrested more than a month after the crime in his Pennsylvania hometown. Caitlin Becker, senior reporter with the Daily Mail, has been following this case closely, joins us live. Thank you for being here, Caitlin. So there's this new development today. There are reports of Kohberger having these numerous pictures of one of the victims on his phone. Is this looking more like a potentially targeted attack?
Well, you know, from the jump, law enforcement said that this was a targeted attack, but they were never specific as to who the targeted victim was or whether or not it was the house itself that was targeted. Now, all along my research and my reporting, it seemed more and more likely that one of the female victims was the intended target. And this latest information just sort of further bolsters that theory. Everything that we've learned so far leads us to believe that Bryan Kohberger, the suspect, allegedly stalked the house several times, up to 12 times, according to the police affidavit, and according to sources, followed all 3 of the female victims on social media. So it does not surprise me to find out that he allegedly had these photos of one of the girls on his phone.
That's right. You know, and Caitlin, we don't know yet which one of the victims he had these photos of, allegedly had these photos of. But what does this say about his potential fixation on at least one of the victims?
It makes a lot of sense to me based on everything I know about this case. The murders were very methodical. He allegedly slipped in and slipped out in less than 20 minutes. He basically went directly up to that 3rd floor, allegedly committed those 2 murders, then down to the 2nd floor and out the door. It seems to me that the target was likely on the 3rd floor. We know that the family of Kaylee Gonsalves, who was murdered on that 3rd floor, has said as much as well, that her father believes that she was likely the intended target. And throughout this investigation, it seems like Kaylee does keep coming up as a likely target, but you also have to remember that she was killed next to her best friend, Maddie Mogan, in the very same bed. And it was next to Maddie's body where that knife sheath was dropped. And that could indicate that that was the spot that the killer initially pulled the knife out of the sheath, and maybe that was the intended target.
Right, and as you mentioned Kaylee Gonsalves' family, and again, her father saying that she did have those defensive wounds. Do we know, Caitlin, if the photos were downloaded from social media or they were actually taken with the camera?
You know, we don't know that. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a mix of both. And I have to tell you, I was at the crime scene and I spent a significant amount of time around the house. And depending on where you stand, you have a clear vantage point into every single window in that home. So it is very plausible that someone outside of the home could have photographed one or more of these girls inside of their home with them having no idea. The way this house is positioned kind of left them like sitting ducks.
So the next thing I want to talk about is how Bryan Kohberger was a fish cutter employee, I guess. He had a job cutting fish. So it just basically shows that he has some knife skills. So it says years before Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger was reportedly fired from his teaching job at Washington State University, he worked as a fish cutter at a lake in Pennsylvania. According to Charles Conklin, the owner of Big Brown Fish and Pay Lakes in Effort, Pennsylvania, Kohberger, 28, previously worked for him for a period of 4 months in 2011 as a seasonal employee when Kohberger was in high school. Kohberger was trained by Conklin to cut and fillet raw fish using industry standard knives. However, Conklin says due to Kohberger's demeanor, he forbid him from ever interacting with customers. He never warmed up and got friendly, Conklin tells People. Most kids that work here we consider like family. He was withdrawn and didn't show improvement, adds Conklin. 11 years later, Kohberger was reportedly fired from his job as a teaching assistant at WSU's Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology, according to a termination letter obtained by News Nation, citing 2 separate alleged altercations with the professor, one in September and another in December. Kohberger's alleged failure to meet expectations as a TA and an alleged lack of progress regarding professionalism, the university decided to cut ties with him effective December 31st, 2022, according to the outlet, a day after his arrest in connection with the Idaho killings. Here's the termination letter. So let me read this termination letter here. It says, Mr. Kohberger, I am writing this letter to formally inform you of the termination of your teaching assistantship with the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology effective December 31st, 2022. The letter reads, in keeping with the WSU Graduate Student Handbook, Chapters 9G2 and 12E3, below is the list of events that led to you being deficient on the following contingency clause of your funding. Maintaining satisfactory progress and fulfilling assistantship service requirements and duties. On September 23, 2022, you had an altercation with the faculty you support as a TA, Professor Snyder. I met with you on October 3rd to discuss norms of professional behavior. On October 21st, Professor Snyder emailed you about the ways in which you had failed to meet your expectations as a TA thus far in the semester. As a result, on November 2nd, Graduate Director Willits and I met with you to discuss an improvement plan, which you agreed to and I shared with you in an email dated November 3rd. We met again on December 7th, this time with Professor Snyder as well as Dr. Willits and I to discuss your progress on the improvement plan. While not perfect, we agreed that there was progress. On December 9th, there was another altercation with Professor Snyder in which it became apparent that you had not made progress regarding professionalism, and about which I wrote to you on December 11th requesting a meeting. We met on December 19th when I informed you of your termination as a TA for spring semester. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said that the details outlined in the letter could have triggered Kohberger. It would not answer why he did this, Coffindaffer told Ashley Banfield. It would explain why he chose the time to do this. Losing a job, potentially losing your income, the embarrassment of losing your position, maybe even having your dream of being a PhD in jeopardy. These would all be triggering factors to propel you into doing something this heinous, combined with his true reasoning from deep inside himself, Coffindaffer said. Yeah, but the only thing is he got fired after he did this, though. He killed on November 13th, and he didn't get fired till December 19th, so, Anyway, I got a couple videos for you about his fish cutting skills.
All right, if you've been wondering how Bryan Kohberger was allegedly able to stab 4 Idaho college students to death in just a few minutes, well, it's a big question for the prosecution to explain to the rest of us, specifically the jury, but some insight into his past may give us some clues. Turns out Kohberger knew how to use a knife. Bryan worked as a fish cutter. He was a fillet man when he was in high school, trained to cut and fillet raw fish. I know how to do it. Means you got to know how to use a knife. Some say I stink at it. We'll see how Kohberger was. Joining me now is retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who unearthed details for us, and Charlie Conklin, owner of the Big Brown Fish and Pay Lakes, the store where Bryan worked. First, I appreciate you coming on, Mr. Brown. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's Mr. Conklin, but thank you.
Mr. Conklin, sorry. Brown Fish, Conklin. What do you want us to know about this kid that you remember? He was a kid then. He's in his late 20s now, obviously. But what did you teach him how to do, and what did you learn about him?
Well, first of all, our records show he was in our employment for 4 months, but he probably only worked about 20 days for us. And as far as filleting fish, he never got proficient at it. We bring kids in and train them, and until they're good enough, we don't allow them to do customers' fish. So he probably only practiced filleting maybe 8 to 10 days out of those 20 days. Another part of their job is to be friendly to customers, to help people fish, to pick up paper and stay busy. This probably was his first job because he was only, I think, 16 at the time. So after he was here several times, it became obvious to me that this job just wasn't for him. He wasn't able to make eye contact with customers and be friendly to them. And he never got good enough for us to allow him to fillet customers' fish. So I talked to his direct supervisor, who already was on board and saw the situation. He talked to Bryan, and really mutually they decided that that job was not for him. So that's
common
the minimal
experience.
Contact.
Common experience for him, by the way. He moved through a lot of jobs early on. It happens, but the reasons here remain somewhat of a mystery. So, Jennifer Coffindaffer, when you were looking at this and you're starting to pick up different pieces, what did you put together so far that you think is of interest to the audience?
Well, to me, this familiarization with a knife. As an investigator, you're looking at not only why did they commit a crime, but how did they commit the crime and their weapon of choice. I always wondered, if you're going to go into a house where you know there's multiple individuals in there, you want something quiet, certainly not a gun, plus that wouldn't have been personal enough. But why not manual strangulation or using a ligature or even blunt force trauma with something? No, he chose a knife. And when I saw this on this application, I thought, wow, he has at least a familiarization with knives, comfortable enough to seek employment using one.
And you also found a lot of information about his employment past. What's the headline on that before we go?
Well, certainly the police training he received, surveillance, conducting various other police jobs. So I think that's really important because we've known he was book smart. We know he studied criminology, but now we see he actually had practical application thereof.
This was our News Nation exclusive that night, as Bryan was the only reporter there after the raid. He could even hear the voices of the Kohbergers inside their home. He knocked on the door, respectfully stood back, and could hear them through that glass window. If you take a really close peek and squint, you can see the duct tape that they'd put over it since the cops had to break in. He could hear them whispering, don't open the door. Bryan Enton is live with me now. Okay, I have so much I need to talk to you about, Bryan. I don't even know where you want to start, but let's just start with this new reporting about another job that he lost, another firing. But this one was significant because he had professional training on how to fillet with an industry standard knife.
Yeah, this was really interesting. Our friend Jennifer Coffindaffer helped to dig this up. Basically, this goes back to 2011 from when Kohberger was in high school. He worked at that fish shop for about 4 months, and his job, and he was trained to cut and fillet raw fish. So he was handy with the knife, but he didn't do so well with the customers, as you mentioned. The owner of the shop said didn't really get along with customers, wasn't really polite to customers. The owner realized very, very quickly that he really wasn't a front of the house type employee. And essentially, he really just didn't work out at all. And after about 4 months, he no longer worked there anymore.
So let's move on to another topic because I find this also fascinating. So much is being done in secret in Idaho. I understand why there's a gag order, but it seems to be overwhelming. Like everything is falling under this gag order. And now we're learning of a secret meeting that happened about this gag order. What have you found out?
Yeah, so this meeting was actually about Ann Taylor, the public defender representing Kohberger. There's been all these questions about whether there is a conflict because there were these, there was this reporting and her name was listed on the documents that had to do with Xana Kernodle's mother when she was arrested. And did she represent Xana Kernodle, and could she actually represent Bryan Kohberger too? Was that a conflict? Well, there was this Zoom meeting. It was back on January 27th between the judge, Kohberger was also involved, and Ann Taylor. And there is now a transcript that has just been released of what happened during that meeting. And it's very interesting, actually, and there is new information about this. Essentially, Ann Taylor told the judge that her name appears on every document in the public defender's office because she is the chief public defender. She says that Xana's mom had a different public defender, that Ann Taylor was not her lawyer, that she has never had any contact with Xana's mom, no relationship ever with Xana's mom, and never offered any legal advice to Xana's mom, and that there really is no conflict there. The judge seems to have agreed based on the transcript. Kohberger at the end of this meeting said that he still wanted Ann Taylor to be his public defender. And the meeting was ended, and apparently that's why things moved forward, and they decided there wasn't a conflict, Ashley.
What I find fascinating about that is if Ann Taylor were so confident of this, I was simply on the masthead of the documents as the head of the public defender office, then why did they send over a state police officer to interview Kara Kernodle in jail, because we have discovered this, and flash pictures at her to see if she recognized Ann Taylor? If they were so confident that they hadn't represented her, why did they need to actually go into the jail and do a lineup for Kara Kernodle to identify whether she had or had not, worked directly with Ann Taylor? I think there's more to this story that we still need to figure out, but it's certainly fascinating to finally get a little sunlight on some court documents. Bryan Enton.
Okay, so here's this unsealed search warrant everybody's talking about. Okay, so you can see this is for his parents' house. And you'll see all the stuff that they intended to get. So look, items to be searched and seized. They have this long list of electronics and just all kinds of stuff, right? Look, all this, items to be searched and seized. And then you go and look at what they actually got. So here's the receipt of property. I mean, I guess they maybe did get more than what's on here, but I'm not sure, because they would have to give a receipt and a list of the property that they got, right? And this is all they have on the list. So I'm doubting that they got any of this other stuff from his parents' house. Now, I know they got some, like this kind of stuff from his apartment. But okay, let me read you the sealed part. So this is the only thing that really is new, is this part. I feel like all this right here, like we already read it. I'm pretty sure, like I read that along with when the full affidavit came out. I'm pretty sure that was included in it. Yeah, because look, then it goes right into this. Or you know what? I think I'm thinking of when they came out and showed what they searched his house for. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this... I might be thinking of when they came out with the search warrant for his apartment. But it's all like the same stuff. And I'm not going to read all of this. This is just items to be searched and seized. I'm just going to read this part right here, the items that they got. Okay? So we have 1 Defiant silver flashlight, 4 medical style gloves, white Arizona Jean Company large t-shirt, Champion WSU Conger's large black sweatshirt. I don't know what that... Cougars, probably. Maybe that's Cougars? Whatever WSU, their mascot probably is probably what it is, I'm guessing. Pair of black and white size 13 9 shoes. Pair of black and white size 13 Nike shoes. Pair of black Under Armour socks. Under Armour black large shorts. Under Armour black boxers large. 1 buccal swab. And this is nothing follows MRM or something. Nothing follows MRM 12/30/22. So is this just the stuff that he was wearing when they arrested him? And then they got the medical style gloves. I wonder, like, what did they get from the trash? Remember well, I guess they got the DNA stuff from his dad, but I don't know where. I'm curious, wonder where they got the medical gloves at and if they were used. But okay, I just wanted to share that. Let's move on to the next thing. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is how Bethany never went upstairs. So Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen were the survivors of the University of Idaho murders, allegedly committed by Bryan Kohberger. A source close to families of the Idaho victims told News Nation that Funk was not among those who discovered the bodies. She was the only one living in the basement at the house and apparently never went upstairs after the killings. It's unclear where Funk currently resides, and according to our source, she has not had any communication with the family members of the victims. No one that I've talked to has seen her on campus at this time. We've heard from Ethan's mother that Ethan's siblings have gone back to campus. They're trying to move forward, but we haven't heard that Bethany is back there. Early on in the investigation, police did state that surviving roommates had been cooperating via interviews. However, Funk was not mentioned in the probable cause affidavit. Survivor Dylan Mortensen, whose room was on the second floor, allegedly saw and mistook the killer as a guest of a party at the house, a source exclusively told Banfield. The source spoke directly with Mortensen, who said she allegedly yelled about the noises heard during the killings because she mistook it for a party-in. First responders were not wearing protective footwear, a source revealed to News Nation. When first responders got to the house, they may have tracked snow-melting chemicals into the home, potentially disrupting the retrieval of footprint evidence.
A source close to the victims' families has told me that Bethany never, ever emerged from the basement room. Like, she never came upstairs. She left the home and was outside in the chaos in the front of the house, but never did go to that second floor, never did see the carnage. She wasn't part of the discovery of the bodies. She was the only one living in the basement at that point. Dylan, the other surviving roommate, you well know now, was on the second floor, had the room across from the kitchen, opened the door, peeked out and saw who she says looked like Bryan Kohberger with the bushy eyebrows, saw that male all clad in black with a black mask walking out.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how supposedly, allegedly, Ethan was killed in the doorway. So new details from sources close to News Nation shed light on how the Idaho College killings unfolded. So Kaylee and Madison were killed first, and the sources confirmed that Ethan and Xana were killed on the second floor afterward, according to sources. They also said Chapin was killed in the doorway of Coronato's room, and Coronado apparently fought back. She repeatedly grabbed the knife from suspect Bryan Kohberger, and she suffered deep cuts to her fingers. Chapin apparently suffered a slash to the neck, according to sources. Certain details conflict with what the coroner in the case and police initially said, which was that all the victims were likely in bed. The coroner also said the injuries were stab wounds and not slash wounds.
Bill, I want to begin with you, if I can. This new information that is coming to us from sources close to the investigation. It really does fly in the face of what the coroner had reported earlier. Is it possible that both things can be true at the same time, what the coroner said and what these sources have said?
Well, good to be back with you, Ashley. Yes, the short answer is yes. When I listened to what the coroner shared, those are very, very general terms, very general comments. So, and now we're talking about specifics. So yes, in the big picture of things, both of those statements are going to be accurate.
And then the notion that Ethan may have made his way partially out into the hallway, is it possible that maybe the attack began there but then ended in the bed? And forensically speaking, and I'll get Joseph Scott Morgan to add to this in a moment, they would be able to tell, the murder investigators would be able to tell?
I think so. I had talked about this before, that it's certainly possible that the evildoer, I will not say his name, did not know about Ethan being present in the house. So he is going to be kind of like a Ron Goldman, Nicole Brown situation, where he is collateral damage. He has to address the fact that he has an unknown present in front of him. So I don't think that he is... when he gets to Ethan and makes that attack, it is certainly possible that he falls back into the bedroom, onto the bed, and then Xana at that point understands that there's something going on. She may already be awake, as Ethan is, and then once he has taken care of Ethan, then he goes after Xana, and she is awake and aware, which gives her the ability to put up a heck of a fight. And unfortunately, of course, it turned out the way it did. So I would say that if the information that you've received is correct, is accurate, that it certainly falls in line with what we were told in very general terms at the beginning of this, and then what the evidence, as far as I was concerned, had led me to speculate on. So yes.
So Joseph Scott Morgan, I was trying to be as tender as possible with the coroner in asking the nature of this is before we ever knew anything about the nature of the stabbings. And I asked if any of the victims had been slashed. And she seemed to be very clear that these were all stab wounds. But these sources are saying that, Ethan had been slashed, that his neck had been slashed, and that was the original injury he received. I guess the same question for you. Can those two things still be true? Can a coroner consider a slash a stab?
If her assessment was made merely by what she saw at the scene, I'd say, yeah, they could be true. Those two things could be true.
Well, I'll stop you right there. I asked her that. I said, were you present for the autopsies? And she said yes.
No, I said at the scene. If she made that assessment at the scene, just to be very blunt with you, these injuries are going to be encrusted with blood. It's hard to make that assessment at the scene. However, if she went to the post, this would have been easily visualized at that point in time. And not only is the injury to the neck a slash, allegedly, according to this person, but these injuries that you're talking about on the hands, these are going to be incised wounds as well. Not necessarily slashes, but this is as a result of grabbing hold of the blade and pulling it through the hand. These are not stab wounds. I can tell you that definitively based upon my experience. So, yeah, there probably are some stab wounds, but that information is, you need more clarity here as to what she's saying. And that's, I guess at the end of the day, it's not really the point. I would draw into question what kind of exam was conducted on site at the scene. I've always wondered, when did she actually get access to the bodies? And how much exposure did she have to the remains that she would have had to have traveled to Spokane to view those posts, because that's where they were done?
Well, I'll tell you what, I did ask, because I know that so much of the reports come in from not only the scene and the logistics of the scene, but also what the medical examiner is able to determine at autopsy. And she said she'd been at both. She was able to confirm the amount of blood in Xana's room was consistent with the injuries that she saw on the scene. So, Phil, I'm going to ask you something that is more about the killer's MO, because Bryan Kohberger is alleged to have staked out that home, been there many times. His phone had been there at the late night hours many times. And so one would only reason that he would stake it out that night as well, and that he would know that Xana and Ethan had come home and were there together, as opposed to being surprised by that.
Well, I think that's the great unknown here. So we don't know if he was there staking it out and what that time frame was.
This week, when prosecutors asked Taylor to share any evidence that might prove Kohberger's innocence, she said, "There are no books, papers, documents, photographs, or copies or portions thereof in the possession of the defendant at this time, which will be submitted at the time of trial." I'm not sure what the heck that means. I mean, I know what it means, but it's, yeah, what an answer. Oh, and they did say, actually, also, they are, to go back to Xana's injuries, they said the Idaho murder victim's hands bagged at scene to preserve possible evidence. So it says the hands of 4 murder victims stabbed in their house may hold evidence that is crucial to the unsolved case. So it says forensic experts say it is possible the 4 victims' hands may contain evidence such as skin or hair under the fingernails that could provide major clues regarding the suspect's identity. Their hands may also have touched DNA if they made any physical contact with the killer or killers. So I just wonder if they do have a lot more evidence, because, I mean, really with the affidavit, they just need enough to get that search warrant, to get the charge, to be able to charge him. So, I mean, maybe they do have more evidence. Maybe they do have more DNA. Maybe they found DNA at his place. You know, they had strands of hair. They had dark, red spots. I mean, maybe they did find the victim's DNA at his house. Hopefully one of those strands of hair, links back to the victims. Or they found a animal, a dog hair, supposedly, maybe. Maybe that's Kaylee's dog's hair. I mean, you never know. They might have more than they put in the affidavit. I would hope they do. As of late February, Kohberger remains in custody in Latah County. He's expected back in court for a hearing beginning June 26th. Okay, guys, that's all I have for this video. Everybody have a good day. Bye.